I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear that I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States. The office of President of the United States.
Remember that voice?
And will, to the best of my ability, preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States. The Constitution of the United States. So help me God. So help me God.
On January 20, Donald Trump took the realms for a second time and became the United States president once again. But this time, Latin America was not just watching. Leaders from Argentina, Ecuador, Paraguay, and Venezuela were in Washington for the event, some inside the Capitol's rotunda. And Trump, even through his America First tone, didn't seem to forget about the region.
They need us much more than we need them. We don't need them. They need us. Everybody needs us.
On his first day in office, Trump signed executive orders on the U.S. southern border, immigration policy, and even to change the name of the Gulf of Mexico.
We are going to be changing the name of the Gulf of Mexico to the Gulf of America, and we will...
In his inaugural address, the new president named Panama 6 times.
We didn't give it to China, we gave it to Panama, and we're taking it back.
Hi, this is Luisa Leme with ASCOA Online. Welcome back to Latin America in Focus. Considering Trump's executive actions, 2025 is looking to hold a shake-up in the region. What does Day 1 executive order say about the new U.S. foreign policy in the Western Hemisphere? We spoke with 3 Council of the Americas experts to find out.
There was a moment on the night of his first day in office when Trump said, well, we don't need Latin America needs us. I don't know that that's completely true. You're going to have to work with Mexico.
If you've been with this podcast in previous years, you know who that is. Carin Zissis, editor-in-chief of ASCOA Online, Mexico expert, and also host of Latin American Focus. I spoke with her and 2 other experts from the House, our Vice President Brian Winter, who's also editor-in-chief of America's Quarterly.
We have experience with Donald Trump, and a lot of the time when he says that he's going to do a very dramatic thing 10 days out, that is Trumpese for let's negotiate, bring me your best offer.
And Juan Cruz Díaz, managing director of Cefeidas Group in Argentina and special advisor to ASCOA.
For many of our countries, it's a very tricky situation. We cannot afford to break with China or with the U.S.
Yes, there's a lot to cover. We spoke about possible upcoming tariffs on Mexico, Javier Milei VIP status during the inauguration, Chinese companies in the Panama Canal, and what's to come on Trump's relationship with other leaders in the region. Thank you for being with us. Let's buckle up for 2025 and see what's in store in this corner of the world of ours.
You're listening to Latin America in Focus.
Latinoamérica en Foco.
América Latina em Foco.
A podcast by America Society, Council of the Americas on politics, economics, and culture in the region.
Brian, Carin, and Juan Cruz, thank you so much for being with us. A Latin American Focus podcast. It's so nice to be able to interview you all about what's to come between the United States and Latin America. I would like to start with Mexico. Donald Trump signed numerous actions on his Day 1, many regarding immigration. He declared a state of emergency on the southern border. He reinstated Remain in Mexico, even said that he will rename the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America. Carin, how would you characterize Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum's response to Trump, and how do you see this relationship going forward?
Thank you so much, Luisa. It's great to be with you here today and to be talking during such an interesting week, and great to be here with Brian and Juan Cruz as well. You know, we know that a lot of these things that we saw in terms of executive actions that came out yesterday were things that Trump promised to do. And what we saw this morning with Claudia Sheinbaum in her first mañanera after Trump's first day in office and his series of executive orders is she said, step by step, and make sure that you actually read what these executive orders say.
Es importante siempre tener la cabeza fría y referirnos a los decretos firmados.
She was pressing for calm, and she was saying, we just have to see, because we're going to see how we can collaborate. And, we're not going to be subordinate to the United States. Now, this might not be such a surprising response, because you do have to look at the details. The devil is in the details. And some of these executive orders are going to be facing legal challenges. So I think that a big aspect of a lot of these executive actions is making good on these promises. We knew that a lot of promises he was making were going to be really targeting Mexico. There was some initial hope yesterday because tariffs on Mexico weren't part of his initial speech. And then, of course, in the evening, he did. But that also has an air of uncertainty. So just like she's saying, we've got to wait, go step by step. We don't know exactly what the details yet are going to be of those tariffs on February 1st. There are a lot of reasons why she might be telling everyone to just calm down, right? Just let's take it step by step, because some of these open the door to questions like, will this result in U.S. military operations in Mexico? What will this mean for the Mexican economy? What will all this mean in terms of controlling the border, in terms of how all of these people that are going to be turned back? And she herself said, it's not clear. We're going to respond in terms of with remain in Mexico in a humanitarian way.
Nuestra propia política migratoria, pero también somos un gobierno humanitario. Si hay una persona que está en la frontera.
But we're going to have to figure out how to get people back to their countries. And some of those details clearly haven't been worked out. And there were questions about, well, is that going to involve some kind of support from the United States financially? And she said, we don't know. We're going to be talking to the State Department. We're going to be. So there was this real sort of sense of, let's take this step by step. But there's a lot to be concerned about. And we focus on tariffs, but closing down the border or declaring cartels as terrorist organizations, all of these things have implications for these two economies in other ways as well.
What do you think is that Sheinbaum's leverage here on this new phase of the relationship that is a phase that Trump is saying that it's America's first, and deal with it? What is her leverage when negotiating?
There was a moment on the night of his first day in office when Trump said, well, we don't need Latin America. Latin America needs us. I don't know that that's completely true. You're going to have to work with Mexico. And we've seen it already, because over the past year, we've seen a big decrease in the number of border apprehensions. And part of that has been due to activities that Mexico has undertaken. It has seemed in recent days and in recent weeks that Mexico is trying to take steps. It's unclear whether they're big enough to be noticed by the incoming Trump administration, but it is taking steps to try to ameliorate some of the concerns that the Trump administration has. Just a few days ago, the Sheinbaum government launched its Plan Mexico, which is a big initiative to grow Mexico's economy, public-private partnerships, and also to focus on reducing imports from China. So all of these things are signaling responses to the concerns that have been emerging from this incoming U.S. government. But a lot of these things are going to take coordination and collaboration, which is what President Sheinbaum has been saying.
Brian, Juan Cruz, is this influencing the relationship with the rest of the region as well?
Well, Louisa, look, I think that it has played differently so far, these initial announcements from President Trump. And, it's funny, I wrote an article for Foreign Affairs that came out in December that attempted to guess what Donald Trump was going to do in the region. Panama was not on my list. And, it showed to me once again the utter folly of trying to predict Donald Trump and trying to understand which way he's going to go. Even with these announcements that Carin was talking about, with 25% tariffs on Mexico and Canada, I found it interesting that he said, well, we might do this February 1st. We have experience with Donald Trump, and a lot of the time when he says that he's going to do a very dramatic thing 10 days out, that is Trumpese for let's negotiate, bring me your best offer. And, countries all over the world, in this case, Mexico and Canada, it's always necessary for them to take these threats seriously because the costs are too high for them to just blow it off and say, oh, he's only negotiating. But we've seen this game before, and so we'll see how it plays out over time. I find myself today in Panama, which is a coincidence. By the way, it's just for the record, I'm here for a conference. But I've already had conversations with several people here, and one thing is clear. This is a country that is also aligned with Trump. It's a country that is very pro-American. It has a conservative leader, and people here are very upset over this talk of the canal because for them, it infringes on a sovereignty issue.
And we gave the Panama Canal to Panama. We didn't give it to China. And they've abused it. They've abused that gift. It should have never been made, by the way. It was giving the Panama Canal.
That's not a left issue or a right issue. That's something that will get people all over the world and certainly in Latin America upset. So we're in early days still, but there several things have happened already that none of us had on our bingo cards.
Did you have Gulf of America on your bingo card, Brian?
I definitely did not have Gulf of America, and I did not have Greenland. And it all points to, this idea almost like a new American imperialism, a new American expansionism, which if he follows through on will drastically change some of the relationships that the United States has in the region.
He mentioned Panama 6 times on his inauguration speech. I think that surprised everyone. And he didn't say just, we will work with Panama. He said, we're going to take it back.
The Panama Canal, and we didn't give it to China. We gave it to Panama, and we're taking it back.
That's a very different tone in relationships with the region. You write that he still needs Latin America for big domestic priorities that he has: migration, the border. Can you talk about how will this new focus look like this year?
Well, let me try to give you my best assessment of what's happening with all this talk about Panama, because I think sometimes with the specifics can illuminate the broader strategy. He is pointing to and reacting to a real issue, which is the growing Chinese presence in Panama and specifically in some of the infrastructure surrounding the canal. Now, it is not true that the Chinese control the canal. The canal is controlled by the government of Panama. But it is true that a Hong Kong-based company controls the massive ports on either side of the canal. And if you believe in things like the Monroe Doctrine, as this administration does, and as many of the officials in this administration do, you see that as an intolerable presence of a foreign actor in what they regard as the U.S. sphere of influence. So let's go to the threat specifically. This declaration, which, as you note, Louisa, was an escalation in Trump's rhetoric, where he said, we're going to take it back. I don't personally believe that's what's going to happen. I think that if you go back and look at Donald Trump's MO, going back all the way to the 1980s, and he opens any negotiation with an absurd opening position. And then you bring somebody to the negotiating table, and you end up with a deal that is satisfactory, usually, to all parties. And I suspect that's where we're headed with this. The United States is probably looking for a way to reduce or cap the Chinese presence in Panama. It was interesting that this week the Panamanian government announced that it would review the concession of these ports to this Hong Kong-based company. And, maybe they'll get some sort of break on some of the fees that President Trump was complaining about with the ships going through the canal. If he gets those things, he'll be able to declare a victory. I believe these clashes carry a cost. They are not welcomed even by governments that are ideologically aligned, just like the Molino government in Panama. But this is the way Donald Trump does things. It's the way it worked during his first term. And as we all know, he is more emboldened this time around. He has more power. He won the popular vote. He has Congress with him. And he's thinking big. He's thinking in terms of legacy. That's just one area of his policies that I think are going to repeatedly touch Latin America over the next 4 years.
When watching the inauguration footage and transmission all over the US and following the press here, talking about who was at the Capitol's rotunda there behind Trump, the symbolism of all these images. Funny enough, cameras filming former President Obama, who's very tall, right? And behind Obama, you see this shock of hair, and that is Javier Milei. Javier Milei, the VIP from Latin America. Juan Cruz, this was really curious and interesting. Does this proximity between the two leaders can become something concrete and a big thing for Argentina from now on, a free trade agreement? What does being a Trump VIP mean for Milei at home?
Certainly, there's a big opportunity that comes from that personal relation. They really like each other. Javier Milei even considers Donald Trump a friend at this point.
Sea el líder que todos esperamos luchando contra la basura woke que está contaminando el mundo.
They really, really like each other. For President Milei, President Trump is an inspiration. In many ways, he admires President Trump, the way he handles power, the way he runs its politics.
Hola, que he tenido una reunión excelente en Buenos Aires y espero volver a verlo porque es una persona que verdaderamente tengo grandes esperanzas.
The way he fights his cultural wars, and he's very, very aligned on that. Of course, when you look at the economy, there's some difference in a way. Of course, President Trump seems to be much more protectionist, and President Milei is a free trader. But there's a big opportunity coming from that personal relation. Remember that the first time they met, President Milei told President Trump, "I hope you win." You know, he early on, he really was betting on President Trump's victory. Every time they met each other, there was an excellent rapport. So there's a huge opportunity there. But also there's a big challenge there, because the President Milei and President Trump, they will need to build an infrastructure to make something of this bilateral relation. I think there's still a long way to go in terms of how Minister Werthing will develop together with the new ambassadors an infrastructure that can make something of this huge opportunity for Argentina. At this point, all the eyes will be headed towards a new deal with the IMF. The signals are quite positive. There was a lot of skepticism a couple of months ago on the possibility of a new deal with the IMF. But now that seems much more positive in that sense. And the idea that President Milei has President Trump's backing for that deal is quite important. But what comes next? I think that's the big question. As Carin was saying and Brian was saying at the beginning, it's too early.
Yeah, leader to leader. I wonder what leaders like Noboa and Santiago Peña and Milei are like also learning with when they come to, an event like Trump's inauguration. But then, Carin, we can talk about the relationship with the Mexican leaders now, because we already have experience with that. Trump and AMLO had a relationship. It wasn't a bad relationship, right? Tell me, how do you think it's going to be different with Claudia Sheinbaum?
One thing I want to start with, because we were talking about so much about invitations, much was made in Mexico about the fact that Claudia Sheinbaum wasn't invited. I think he did her a favor by not inviting her. Because what would have happened if she showed up? We have to remember that in 2016, when he was running for president, Donald Trump went to Mexico and held a press conference with the president at the time, Enrique Peña Nieto, and it was viewed as as Peña Nieto giving him a platform, and that really was when Peña Nieto's popularity bottomed out. So in a way, I think it solved a lot of problems. And meanwhile, she actually had some important figures who were there. For example, one of her closest economic advisors was there, Altagracia Gomez. So in one of their first phone conversations, it's notable that in the readout on both sides, it was pointed out that Trump said, "Oh, say hello to Andres for me. A reminder that we had this friendship in the past and everything was good and it can keep being good. But that was my guy." It was a little double-edged sword there. Claudia Sheinbaum has the strongest mandate around. She won an election by more than 30 points. She's got an approval rating of 78%. And there's every indication that at least right now, Mexicans are rallying around her and backing her with her approval rating going up, opinion of the United States going down. Even members, there's an increase in people who self-identify with the opposition saying that they're happy with her government. So right now, things are going well for her, and we know that Donald Trump likes winners. Claudia Sheinbaum right now is a winner. I think we can see a little bit of a difference in terms of the interactions between him and Justin Trudeau and him and Claudia Sheinbaum. How that will carry out in the future, depending on all of these things that aren't known, depending on all of these things and the role of Mexico, because there are all of these concerns, obviously, around crime, around fentanyl, around cross-border issues. We do kind of have to wait and see. But there are, to play devil's advocate, a few things working in Claudia Sheinbaum's favor right now.
I would add, it's definitely true that Claudia Sheinbaum is popular, but I think she also realizes that this is a deeply asymmetrical relationship. And okay, she has 80% popularity today, but if a tariff does get passed on the order of 25% or even 5 or 10%, Mexico's going into recession and her popularity won't survive that. And so, it's fragile. I am personally concerned about the US Mexico relationship. I know you are as well, Karin, because I look, I mean, we've all been listening to Donald Trump for many years. It's true that he forged a relationship of respect and perhaps even friendship with Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador. But you read some of the memoirs from the first term and you talk to people who were part of that first government, like I have, and a story emerges where, Trump at several different points wanted a rupture with Mexico. He wanted to leave NAFTA. He wanted to close the border. And according to, these narratives, at least, he was talked out of it by people who were close to him, like John Kelly, his first chief of staff, like Rex Tillerson, who was his first secretary of state. Those people are not there this time. He is now surrounded by people who seem more hesitant to tell him no, either because of his political strength or because they are aligned with him, more aligned than that first group was. And over a longer period of time, Donald Trump sounds to me like somebody who really wants two things. He wants more distance with Mexico, because he believes that relationship has not been good for the United States. He sees Mexico as a source of problems, whether it's migration or stealing jobs, especially manufacturing from the U.S. And then the second part is he sounds like somebody who just really, really wants to do tariffs because he thinks tariffs are good. This is something that he's believed, by the way, going all the way back to the 1980s. So, all of these things can be true at once. He may be negotiating when he talks about this threat on February 1st. He may see Claudia Sheinbaum with respect. He may appreciate some of the things that she's doing already with regard to organized crime. But the possibility of there being some kind of disaster from the Mexican point of view is real.
All illegal entry will immediately be halted, and we will begin the process of returning millions and millions of criminal aliens back to the places from which they came. We will reinstate my Remain in Mexico policy.
This is all very interesting when you were saying, Brian, about like an even relationship. Trying to look at the other side of his speeches on day one, he didn't really mention China a lot. He talked more about Panama than China, if you think about the mathematics of words. He didn't stress much naming China as an enemy or a threat, right? In a sense, it's a relationship that is too big to fail. Brian, you talked about the Panama Canal, and I kind of want to bring Juan Cruz in again at the same time because like the whole region has been doing. Milei also doesn't rule out China. He wants deals with the US, but he's also traveling to China this year.
For many of our countries, it's a very tricky situation. We cannot afford to rake with China or with the US. For countries like Argentina, we're heavily dependent on our exports to China, but also we're heavily dependent on the US for investment, for financing, and especially now with this special relationship that President Milei has with President Trump. So we need to walk this thin line between China and the US in a very pragmatic and smart way. And honestly, President Milei has been doing that. President Milei showed that he's much more pragmatic in some ways than many people expected. We saw that with President Lacalle Pou in Uruguay as well, in that sense, navigating that relationship in a way because the US did not deliver and China was delivering for some of these countries. So it's a challenge, but also an opportunity to see how the Trump administration would address that. But again, we cannot afford to break with China for many of our countries.
Yeah, Carin, not being able to afford to break with China. We're talking about a possible recession in Mexico. Chinese investment in the last years in Mexico has just been growing. How you think China will fit in this new North America that comes with America First?
Well, it's been a big part of the conversation in terms of U.S.-Mexico relations. It's been sort of what will Trump do? And then there's been a follow-up question always about China. It's been this ongoing thing in terms of Chinese cars in Mexico and the question around their production. And we have seen, as I said, a few steps that the Sheinbaum government is trying to take steps as though we're moving away from that, shutting down these big Chinese malls in Mexico City, even announcing that Mexico is going to start producing its own electric vehicle in time for the North American World Cup that will be in competition with Chinese cars, so different steps that she's been taking, again, Plan Mexico, and this idea that there's going to be an inward focus on domestic production. But one thing that's interesting is that we also talked about legacy, and I think that there's a real focus in Mexico on this idea of legacy. And there's also sort of a focus on nationalism and an inward look that's happened in recent years under AMLO, and that we see some signs of it in addition under Sheinbaum as well. So it's odd because as much as Claudia Sheinbaum is arguably even more of a leftist than AMLO is, I think that she's, oddly enough, has a few ways that the nationalism can overtake the left-right divide, which can mean a little bit less sometimes in a place like Mexico. So I think we see a little bit of that nationalism in Mexico as well.
No matter where you go in Latin America, leaders left, center, right, all of them say that the same thing keeps them up at night, which is the idea of having to choose between Beijing and Washington. And, some of the most enthusiastic proponents of ties with China over the last 10 years have been leaders on the right, people like Mauricio Macri in Argentina, Guillermo Lasso in Ecuador, Iván Duque in Colombia, and others. Now, I don't believe, and I have heard, that the Trump administration will not ask governments around the region to stop trading with China, because the United States also trades with China. The question, however, is around strategic investments or investment in strategic assets like electricity grids and ports and 5G telecommunications. And I think over the last couple of years, leaders thought that they were able to kind of walk this line. I think the line has moved or is in the process of moving now with Donald Trump's return. And Washington is going to, see that line as even more inclined toward the United States than they did in the first go around, because circumstances have changed.
Talking about investments in the region and investments on these key areas, Juan Cruz, you're in Argentina going through this year where there's a lot of buzz about that, right? We saw Trump at the Capitol Rotunda with a heavyweight team of corporate America behind him. The private sector in the U.S. seems excited about the opportunities to come. I'm interested in understanding from you guys, how do you think this will play in Latin America? When we talked about Trump's efforts to pressure countries against Chinese investment in these key areas, like you said, Brian, does that mean a U.S. company will be there then? Are we talking about he's going to negotiate with Panama, and then Panama said, oh, yes, I'll review the concessions for the canal. Does that mean that a big trade transportation company that is American will step in to the negotiation?
I think that's the important thing to watch. In conversations with leaders in the region, we hear that I'm super willing to be aligned to the U.S. to do a trade agreement to increase trade and so on. But then some of the Latin American leaders didn't get what they expected from the U.S. And at the same time, they were getting a lot of things from the Chinese. So that's, I think, the important thing to watch. If we're going to see an increased level of American investment in strategic sectors, in energy, in infrastructure, and others, I think that will be critical for this matter. And actually, it would be helpful for Latin American leaders that want to be aligned with the U.S. It's easier, they're closer, they're culturally more aligned, and so on. So I think that's the thing to watch. And honestly, the U.S. has been lagging behind there.
In my conversations with the Trump people, they also recognize that there have to be carrots, there have to be incentives. They have to do things through Development Finance Corporation, through some multilateral lenders as well, to incentivize greater U.S. investment and provide an alternative, because if they don't, you do run the risk of pushing some of these countries more into the arms of Beijing.
How much of a priority will be Latin America for the Trump administration? We can read Marco Rubio's appointment as Secretary of State as that, or not.
I keep imagining Marco Rubio giving answers about Venezuela and talking about Chinese investment in Latin America while he takes a plane to the Middle East, while he's going to talk about Ukraine, while he's going to talk about the rest of the world that it's been exploding. Is it going to really be a priority?
My first reaction would be that it would be less of a priority than one can expect, in a way. I think things are happening in the world that will take precedence, in a way. The Middle East, Ukraine, Russia, China, a lot of things going on in Europe. So I'm relatively skeptic in terms of how of a priority will be Latin America for the Trump administration. But again, it's wait and see. But my first reaction would be a little bit skeptic on that. I would be interested to see what Brian and Carin thinks about this.
And I think that Mexico is going to be a priority one way or another, because he has continuously made Mexico a big subject. I mean, it's key on immigration, it's key on security, it's key on tariffs and trade. So I agree with Juan Cruz that generally we might see a situation where Latin America, with all of the other things going on and all of the other challenges going on in the world, we might continue to find ourselves saying it needs more attention. But I think we're going to be hearing a lot about Mexico one way or another.
Yes. I mean, I think that Latin America it's already clear, just a couple days in, that it's a huge priority for this administration. I've said elsewhere that I think this will be the administration that pays the most attention to Latin America. And that's because so many of Donald Trump's policy priorities touch on policy toward the region, specifically the border. And it's clear that Mexico is in a category of its own when it comes to this focus. But look at what we've seen already. We saw a Latin American leader on stage for the inauguration. We have seen all these declarations about Panama that we've been talking about. I think it's just a matter of time before he sends his first shot across the bow against Lula and Gustavo Petro. And we have not even touched, because there's been so much else to talk about perhaps, some of the issues in the region that are most prominently on his radar, which is the three socialist dictatorships of Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua, which there's reasons to believe will consume a lot of his attention and bandwidth as well. So will there be other spots of the world that will compete? Yes, there always are for a U.S. president. But I think that it's going to be good news for some people and bad news for others. This is an administration that is already showing it is Latin America front and center.
That's great. I appreciate so much the time from the three of you. This was great. Thank you so much for coming to Latin American Focus. And I'm sure that we will hear from the three of you in different occasions during the year on the podcast. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having us.
It was fun. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. I'm your host, Luisa Leme. We're glad to be back in 2025.
There's fire growing in the tracks. My heart is burning to pull me back.
This episode was produced by our associate producers Fabricio Ricaldi and Gladys Gerbeau. I'm executive producer of the show. You can read more about Trump and Latin America on our website, as-coa.org, and in the new edition of America's Quarterly magazine. The music in this podcast is Old Wooden Chair, performed by Nation Beat for America Society. Find out about upcoming concerts happening here in New York at musicoftheamericas.org and become a member of America Society. If you listen up to here, check out other episodes of Latin American Focus at www.as-coa.org/podcast. Or write us an email telling what you think at latinfocus@as-coa.org. Share with other Latin America aficionados and whoever is interested in what's to happen this year. Subscribe at Apple, Spotify, YouTube, or whatever you get your podcasts. Opinions expressed in this podcast do not necessarily reflect those of America Society, Council of the Americas, or its members. Thank you.